if I understand it correctly, the origins of Sharia law was very quick. I mean, it was Muhammad's life. I mean, that's a couple decades.
Actually,
I mean,
no. That's the common misconception. Sharia law predates Islam. Sharia law began with Roman law, Persian law, Babylonian law. During the early Umayyad Caliphate, when they took over the Middle East, they began to just re-implement the Roman law and the Persian law. That's where Sharia comes from. And then the al-Hadith, the traditionalists, were unhappy with this. Though, you know, there was all this conflict between the jurists, who were just doing the Roman law and so forth, and those who actually thought that all law should be based on the Sunnah and the life of Muhammad and the Quran. And so basically, it wasn't until Imam al-Shafi that these two separate phenomena were married into fiqh, what we call today, you know, Islamic jurisprudence, or, you know, which is basically the implementation of Islamic law. And so that's a common misconception. It did not begin with Muhammad and the Quran. It actually began with Roman law and so forth.
Islam actually got in the way of science. And the most spectacular example of this is medicine. Now, there is this thing, you've all heard of homeopathic medicine, and all these funny little folksy remedies that we have in Europe and, you know, the Eurosphere. But there's actually a Middle Eastern equivalent, which they call Unani or Unani medicine. Which basically actually means Greek medicine. Basically what happened was when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East, he took lots of scientists with him, and then basically this science has survived till today. But what happened was this science got mixed also with Arabic science and with something else, which is hadiths, and this becomes the Prophet's medicine. And basically, well, let me read you a few interesting things. According to the Prophet Muhammad, and this is all based from hadiths from Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and Sunan Abu Dawud al-Sijistani. According to the Prophet Muhammad, the three greatest medicines and cures available to mankind are honey, cupping, that is bloodletting, and cauterization, which is branding by fire, although Muhammad instructed his followers not to use the latter for some reason. Muhammad instructed his followers to drink camel's milk and urine as medicine, and stated that certain black seeds could cure any disease except for death. Yeah. He maintained that a type of barley meal invigorated one's heart. He said that wine was a disease and not a cure, right? Which is directly opposite. Now, of course, a lot of doctors say, yeah, one cup of wine a day is great for your health. Muhammad said it is a disease and not a cure. He said that antimony, which I think is a kind of metal or element, is a cure for eye problems and loss of hair, and he claimed that Indian incense can cure 7 diseases, and that mushrooms can cure eye diseases. He said that fevers come from the heat of hell and need to be quenched by water. So if you have a fever, that's actually hell leaking through into you. He said that prayer and reciting the Quran is a great cure, right? Is a cure for snake bites, scorpion stings, and, are you ready for this? The curse of the evil eye. Among other things.
I have to read something from the chat just so it goes into the recording on YouTube. Somebody has made the comparison between ajwa dates and sensu beans from Dragon Ball Z. The one being that you could have like a giant hole in your chest and you'd eat one of these sensu beans and it would just heal you magically up and you'd be fully restored. So yeah, from now on I'm going to call those ajwa dates sensu dates, because they would just, he said in Bukhari and several others, if you took 7 ajwa dates in the morning, then for the rest of the day you'd be immune to both poison and curses. Curses, see? There's no pill on the market today that does both of those things. I mean, there's nothing that gives you immunity from curses. Of course, Muhammad was both, according to the tradition, poisoned and cursed during his lifetime. So apparently he was getting a little senile, forgot to take his medicine. He should have had, see, some brilliant Muslim innovator should have come up with the very first one of those little things that old folks get that have their pills in Monday, Wednesday, you know, each day of the week it has the pills they're supposed to take, and he should just put the little dates in there. That way, you know, even as he was getting on in years, he wouldn't have forgotten to take his, you know, his dates.
And yet he had open heart surgery. Come on, just before you went up on the...
Angels have very clean hands. They're like doctors.
Yeah, can I read this Sahih hadith about the Prophet medicine?
Please. Yes.
It's in Bukhari. The Prophet says, healing is in three things: cupping, a gulp of honey, and branding with fire. But I forbid my followers to use branding with fire. So that's
which is what I was saying earlier. Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants, I mean, I have literally like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of hadiths from Bukhari and Muslim, Dawood, which I have linked for every single claim I'm making here. So if anyone actually wants all these, they can just contact me.
And that is actually Islamic science.
I mean, some of it is actually really serious. Like, all these traditions are funny and cute, but there's some shit that, some information that has actually really serious implications. Muhammad said that any Muslim who dies of the plague dies a martyr. And he commanded his followers that if the plague comes into your country, ignore it. He basically told his followers to ignore plague. He said, don't approach it, right? But don't flee from it. And so this is, I mean, this kind of apathetic attitude towards the plague has a massive consequences. I mean, given the massive pandemics that swept the world many times, for a prophet to say this is just absolutely atrocious. I mean, for anyone to say that Islam is the basis for science, particularly medical science, I mean, all these traditions which are attributed to Muhammad beg otherwise. And based upon these traditions, actually, Muslims developed what we call the Prophet's medicine, which is still used today. And like Harun Yahya, for example, these kinds of like homeopathic propaganda where they make documentaries. They're Muslim equivalents where they espouse the miracles of the Prophet's medicine and how it works so well. You know, I mean, and Harun Yahya and all these others. But of course, the reality is that most of these cures are extremely superstitious and nonsensical. They don't work. But here we have the Prophet stating as fact that all of this nonsense works as cures. So this is getting in the way of science. This is stating as fact things which are not true.
And what it is, if you remember the Quran scientist miracle claims in the Quran, this is the truth that I've got a channel debunking where I've interviewed the scientists that were misrepresented. There is a Quran called by someone called the Quran Project, and in this book it's got these people from the documentary This Is the Truth are quoted in there, like Alfred Kroner and so on, stating that there are scientific miracles in the Quran. After interviewing these people, I've interviewed 4 of them: William Hay, Alfred Kroner, Pete Palmer and Professor Tom Armstrong. I sent this book to each of them, and every one of them kindly wrote a statement inside the book saying that their views were misrepresented. I'll read out the statements to you. William Hay wrote, "The statement attributed to me in this volume does not correctly represent my views." Pete Palmer says, "As one of the scientists in the project on miracles in the Quran, I was not then, nor am I now, convinced that any of the Quranic scientific statements are of divine origin." Armstrong says, well, Armstrong's a bit difficult to read actually. I did have a printout. Hang on a second. Mr. Armstrong says, My appearance in the video This Is the Truth, sponsored by Sheikh Zindani, has been edited after the fact to misrepresent my interviews as endorsing the scientific validity of interpretations of the Quran. And finally, Alfred Kroner writes, the statement made on various internet pages do not reflect the opinion that I voiced at the time of a TV interview in Jeddah. Took me out of context, and the entire matter is fabricated. I'm not sure if you can see the text, but what we've got is statements by these scientists in their own handwriting with their own signatures, basically refuting the lies of the scientific claims of the Quran made in their names. I would like to auction this for MSF event, and considering how much I would dearly, dearly love to keep it, but I can't because they only signed it because I was going to auction it. I really hope that someone's going to pay a lot of money because this is a really unique item.
The thing is, right, jihad also does mean it's struggle, right? So it can also mean
hang on.
It can also mean spiritual struggle.
Stop, Kling. In Arabic, both classic and modern, there are different verbal forms. Anyone who studied Latin or Finnish or a language that has many additional cases that English and other languages like English don't have knows that there's a agglutination in certain languages, including Arabic, which gives a much more precise meaning to the same word. Now, in the case of verb forms 5 and 6, those are the passive and reflexive. So if you use something, if you take a verb that, you know, like let's just say the verb to kick, but then you inflect it for verb form 6, you say to kick, but because it's agglutinative, it means to kick yourself. You understand? It also works with groups. So, for example, say we are arguing. If we do that in verb form 1, 2, or 3, it means we're arguing against someone else. But if I say we are arguing in verb form 6, it means we here on the panel are arguing with each other. It's reflexive. So if you look, you can easily verify it for yourself. And there is one passage in the Quran that uses that form, and it says, you know, one must make, you know, war against yourself. You know, when Muslim apologists quote that is a real verse. But in all the other instances, it is in one of the earlier the other verb forms that clearly indicate that you as the subject are to act against a foreign object. So it's very clear with no room for confusion. So when people say that, they are mistaken. Yeah, the word lemusiuna, it means we are the expanders. It's like in Spanish, you have a lot of you can take almost any word and add "or" to it, and it becomes like an occupation or an identity. You know, matar is to kill, matador is the killer, and the guy who kills the bull. So that's all that word. The word is just it is a noun derived from the past, the participle of a verb, which in its default case indicates the past in their language, just like in ours. For example, a past participle in English would be made, sensed, said, thought, flavored. So when you say that something is lemon flavored, you're not necessarily emphasizing that, okay, it was lemon flavored at one point and it isn't necessarily anymore. You know what I mean? It's just the participle is used to describe its state, but there's nothing explicitly about tense. But if you really want to read into it, you have to you can't avoid the fact that it's based off the past participle. But the verbs, the actual conjugated verbs earlier in the sentence, are clearly in the completed perfective tense. Because so when he says, you know, we constructed it, that's in the perfect. It's the same as if we said not just I did something, but I have done something. It's perfective. It's done. It's finished. So the people who say that word means we're continuing to expand it, it's a complete and utter fabrication. That doesn't mean that the individual person who says it to you is lying. It's just that they're kind of disseminating bad information.
And this is why people hate English majors, by the way. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but I just think that pretty much all the translations that you read indicates that it is an ongoing process.
Yeah,
they've been. Here's what you should do. Okay, is find an English translation that has not been done within the last 50 years.
Yes.
Yeah, but for example.
No. Just let me finish my sentence. Let me finish what I was going to say. Okay. There's probably plenty of them, and then you can probably find a tafsir that was translated into English prior to 50, 60 years ago. You know, before the Big Bang was an actual theory. Okay. And then read those tafsirs, and I guarantee you that you're not going to find that's
Which verse was it?
5147.
5147.
Okay, because
all the translations that you're reading online have probably all been done within the last 10, 20 years, and that doesn't really tell you anything. That just tells you that they've looked at the scientific theories and they've made their translations fit.
Yeah.
Sorry, I dropped out. Sorry,
can I quickly? Here's a total of 6 different translations, just sort of randomly selected. Okay. Sahih International has, "And the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are," and it has in parentheses, "its expander." Muhsin Khan says, "With power we did construct the heaven. Verily we are able to extend the vastness of space thereof." There it's saying, okay, that verb, that sort of occupational noun, it's saying we are able to do it, and it's using it like it's a modal. In Pickthall we have built the heaven with might, and we it is who make the vast extent thereof. Yusuf Ali has, "With power and skill we did construct the firmament, for it is we who create the vastness of space." And Shakir has, "And the heaven we raised it high with power, and most surely we are the makers of things ample." Dr. Ghali says, "And the heaven is also a sign. We have built it with our hands, i.e. capability, and surely we are indeed extending it wide." So of those, only one had a continuing, Ali hit the nail on the head. Only the most modern of those 7 that I selected had extending. Only the most modern. So this is really something that's come up recently, and you see all the others, it says, we're the guy who did it. That's what all the other translations, and those translations are really more with what the actual grammatical breakdown of that word says, because there's nothing about that word, nothing at all that deals with tense. It's just like if I say, this vase took a long time for me to build, I am a potter. You understand? The statement "I am a potter" has no impact on the issue of time on the work of that vase. But I've already said in a previous sentence that the vase has been done. It is completed. So what you need to look at is the actual verb in the first clause of this verse, where it says "we constructed," because it's in a perfective tense.
No. Historically, this is a really strange. I don't know where this idea came from. I think maybe it's because some groups, like I think the Mevlevis would be one, are very pacific, are very ecumenical, and to have that appeal. But Sufis have been the worst when it comes to Islam. It's amazing. It's like when you look at history and you look at all the major jihads leading up from around 1500 till 1900, I think the overwhelming majority of them was Sufi-led and Sufi precipitated, and often defensive against, say, Russian imperialism, but often aggressive as well, like Sufi-led invasion of Tibet in around like 1500 or something. They've been the worst amongst the worst. I would say they're on the same tier as Wahhabis. In fact, they've done far more because they've been around for much longer, and they were more popular for longer. So Sufis have been the worst, amongst the worst when it comes to violent imposition. I don't know where this bloody Sufis are so peaceful. I don't know where it comes from.
What if the problem is that the audience, the style of the Quran is elusive. It's referential. It's presupposing that the audience are already intimately familiar with all these materials, with all these stories. Most of the time they get brought up in reference, in passing, and remember the time with this and that and the other, right? So it'd be like me talking to so I'm from Australia, right? It'd be like me talking to an audience and saying, that thing about that time when the Shah was ousted and blah blah blah. My audience is going to have no idea what I'm talking about. No idea. And yet what we're supposing with the Quran is that the audience is deeply immersed in the kind of materials that are being referred to offhand, right? That's the problem. So it's not like he's explaining all this stuff. Most of the time it's just assumed that this is common knowledge. This doesn't work with a pagan audience. This doesn't work with a Jewish audience to have all this Christian material. Very extensive Christian material, Christian interpretations of the Bible, right, like the devil and all this kind of, Christian stories and lore. It just doesn't make sense. And so what ended up happening is that following the Mongol destruction of the, by this time, symbolic caliphate, the significance and prestige of the Hajj increased substantially. So the caliphate declined, and the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, to the Hijaz, to the Al-Haramain, the holy sanctuaries, became the real focus point for Islam, or for Muslims, let's say. And so, thus, control over these holy cities also became important for rulers, because it became of propaganda, ideological importance, right? And so, by the time of the Crusades, the caliph is completely symbolic. I mean, even after the Mongols destroy the caliphate, you have some people try and preserve caliphs, and they'll, the Mamluks tried to keep a caliph around and say, yeah, this is the continuation of the Abbasids, but it was purely for show. It was purely symbolic. But when the caliph was completely weak, you had, during the time of the Crusades, other rulers who were not weak. So you had the Syro-Egyptian Sultan, Kurdish Sultan, in fact, Salah ad-Din Yusuf bin Ayyub, Saladin. And he actually, the caliph was powerless, but Saladin, he was actually able to repel the Frankish incursion into the Levant, into the Holy Land, vis-a-vis the apathy of the powerless caliphate. And so this generates a rivalry between Sultan, Saladin on the one hand, and the caliph on the other. And to sort of make himself more important, to bolster his rule, to bolster his position vis-a-vis the caliph, in his rivalry with the caliph, Saladin actually adopted the title Servitor of the Two Sanctuaries, Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, as the ruler of the Hijaz of Western Saudi Arabia.
Well, and with this, explain that the two sanctuaries, what they are.
Oh well, there's just the holy mosque, the holy Haram sanctuary in Makkah and Medina, which are held to be, these. Well, in Makkah, I think the Haram is where the Kaaba is located, where the black box is located there. Whereas you also have the special mosque of Muhammad in Medina.
Yeah, that's what the Haramain is. It's plural for two.
Yeah. Haramain is like Bahr is sea, Bahrain is the two seas. Haram is the sanctuary, Haramain is the two sanctuaries.